This is the Turf Zone Podcast, your central information and news hub, bringing together professionals from turf associations across multiple states to share things to help you and your business. Brought to you in partnership with our friends at the Tennessee Turfgrass Association. This episode is sponsored in part by Sod, world-class service on demand. Visit us online at www.buysod.com. Now, let's get in the zone.
Welcome to the Turf Zone. In this episode of Tennessee Turfgrass, we are talking to the one and only, the man himself, Dr. Tom Samples, UT Extension Specialist. Tom, thank you so much for finding a little bit of time to talk to me this morning.
Oh, thank you, Julie. It's always a pleasure, and we really do appreciate what all you and Leading Edge do for our turfgrass industry and for us at UT.
Well, you guys have been a great help to us with getting information, and I have always enjoyed working with you. So it really is an honor to get to talk to you, and we're celebrating your pending retirement this summer after how many years in the industry?
Oh, gosh, I started here at UT in late November of 1985. So,
okay.
Well over 36 years, maybe plus.
Excellent. So prior to that, tell me a little bit about the history that led up to you ending up at Tennessee for the majority of your career.
Well, it's kind of interesting because a lot of my colleagues, they were great golfers or they lived near a golf course. I kind of got into this thing called turf in a roundabout way. I majored in agronomy crops at Ohio State. My dad was a farm manager in Ohio. And late in my high school career, I decided, I really like this farm thing. And I really would enjoy farming, but we didn't own any land. And so I thought to myself that maybe rather than farm, maybe I just need to find a job or a vocation where I can help farmers. So I majored in agronomy crops at Ohio State. You had two choices, either crops or soils. And I chose agronomy crops. So my background is in row crop agriculture as an undergrad at Ohio State. And then my first job when I got out after graduating from Ohio State, I worked for a farm cooperative in Middle Ohio, but we were right in Franklin County, Ohio, which is the Columbus area. And after about 5 years there, I realized, boy, we're losing farm acreage. And co-op, of course, is farmer owned and operated. And to be brutally honest, I was not a great manager. I could not convince my board to allow me I wanted to establish a retail nursery center and a retail greenhouse area in Hilliard, Ohio, which is just on the outskirts of Columbus. And I just couldn't convince my group that needed to happen. But while I was there, I got very interested in lawn care products. And this was a time that ChemLawn was really cranking up. And then there was an upstart company called Perfalawn that was located in Hilliard. And I got to befriend a lot of those folks that were out there making lawn applications. And I gained their confidence for some strange reason. And I got really interested in the products and the product lines. And then my wife graduated from Ohio State, and her parents lived in northeastern Oklahoma. And we went through one winter where we were basically living in a mobile home park that was fed off the propane tank, which was a central propane tank. And the administrator of the park we'd run out of propane. And so when the blizzard hit, my wife and I were like 3 days without heat. And thank goodness there were snow drifts and we just kind of hunkered down. But I promised her, I said, if we survive this, we're going to go wherever you want to go. And so she wanted to go get her master's in library science. And with her parents in Oklahoma, I thought, I want to work with turf grasses that are under stress. And so really, I thought, I actually came and visited the University of Tennessee and met with Dr. Callahan was not on campus at the time. So I met with Dr. Don Williams, and we talked about the turf program. And then I went to Oklahoma, and we went to Oklahoma State, and it was almost like family. And so that's where Wanda and I ended up. And then having pursued a master's degree, I had no earthly idea that I would ever have a PhD, but I just fell in love with the research and all that and the people of Oklahoma. And Julie, to this day, I tell people probably way too much, but you could take the people in Oklahoma and the people here in Tennessee and just swap, and you wouldn't miss a lick. They're just so sociable and they kind of take care of their own.
Right.
And so, but once I started to work on my PhD, I decided, I'm not sure I want to do this grant writing and research thing as much as I want to do outreach. And so I talked to my major advisor, who was Dr. Doug Breedy. He eventually became the head of the turfgrass breeding program at what was then Jacklin Seed Company. But I talked to him about, hey, do you think I could survive as an extension person, as an extension specialist? And he kind of embraced that. And so he made sure I talked a lot at meetings, and I didn't have a problem talking a lot, but I needed a venue. And so, and I was, believe it or not, I was quite bashful. And so
I actually don't believe it.
no, I really was. So I had to work on my speaking skills, and I'm just about there, But so anyway, then having graduated at Oklahoma State, I had two opportunities, and I just loved Tennessee. My dad was born and raised in Hamlin County.
Okay.
And so we had visited my grandparents for years, and I'd spent many summers near Morristown. And my grandfather, you and I just talked about language. And so I'm not going to use exactly the words he used. And he always called me son. He wouldn't call me grandson. He goes, son, you're one of those Yankees. And you came.
I appreciate that edit, Tom. You make my job easier.
You came to Tennessee and stayed. But with my grandparents, I was so close to them, and they really enjoyed the fact that I kind of came back to Tennessee. And I just remember just falling in love with the state. But above and beyond that, what's made my job so rewarding, when you come out of grad school, you've got a certain base knowledge, and you've been taught how to write journal articles, and you don't even put a comma before the word and you very rarely use the word be. And all of a sudden I filled this extension position, and my first assignment was to actually write 3 4-H guides for students. I think there were, if I remember right, it was 5th grade, 8th grade, and 11th grade. And here I am, I just survived a dissertation and wrote journal articles and was so kind of square. And all of a sudden, and so my editor, thank goodness, I have one of the best editors in the world, and we're still very close friends. Her name is Wanda Russell. And I kid her all the time. I take her out to lunch and I won't let her pay, because I tell her, I said, if it hadn't been for you, I wouldn't have been promoted, because she basically taught me how to write for the public. Well, at least for children.
You know what? The public and children are not all that different.
So anyway, and I had, it kind of fit well, because at this point in my career, I still think like a 5th grader. It keeps me young.
That's fantastic. Well, and I think that people who know you would say that you have the energy and the joy of a 5th grader, which is absolutely a compliment.
Well, okay, I'll take it. Yes,
take it. So, that's so interesting because, and for a little bit of context, you share articles with me all the time for Tennessee Turfgrass Magazine, and many of those articles go well beyond Tennessee. We're able to share that with other associations that my company, Leading Edge, works for. Your articles, I actually see that. I didn't know that story, that you kind of had to make that transition from writing for journals to writing for regular people, the public or children. And I can see that. And I've always seen that in the articles that you've so generously shared with me for our readers here in Tennessee and beyond.
But just so the people know, Julie, I'm speaking with an awesome editor.
I don't know that I'm doing that much.
No, but I'll tell you what else I've learned. And my dad always made sure that I remained humble all through my childhood. But one thing I've learned, and I learned it quite quickly, and thank goodness for that, is when you write something, it's yours, you wrote it. But editors deserve everything they're paid. And so I remember I got the first edit back on that fifth grade 4-H publication, and I'd never seen so much red ink in my life. And this was before computer. Now you got to remember, this was hard
Mhm.
copy.
Yeah.
And so after about my third publication, working with my editor here at UT, she changed from red to purple. And I asked her one time, I said, "What's the deal going to purple?" She said, "I have a color that I use as you progress, as you make strides." And so from that point on, I didn't go beyond purple. So I don't know what the next color was.
Who knows what the next? Okay, Tom. So we talked about how you got to UT, and I know that in the years that you've been there, there's really been a big change in the work that's being done around turfgrass and specific studies there, and the team you have now. As someone who has been there for the evolution of that, can you tell me how the current turfgrass program at UT kind of came to be?
This is one of my favorite topics. In fact, talk about timeliness. I was asked by a great friend of mine on faculty, who I very rarely say no to do a seminar about the turf program.
Mhm.
I said, "What do you want me to say?" And she said, "Well, say whatever you want." So I went back, I got old pictures, and then I modernized it. There were actually three objectives to this seminar. It was a departmental seminar.
Mhm.
The first objective, I had no idea how great SEC football was. I'd been to Ohio State, which was then the Big Eight, and they had Ohio State versus Michigan. And then there was another team to be named later that would be competitive in that conference. Okay. And then I went to Oklahoma State in that conference. That was always, at that time, it was Oklahoma University and then Nebraska,
Mhm.
and then another team to be named later. So, and then when I came to the SEC, I realized, holy cow. I would argue to this day that the SEC is by far just such an awesome conference because of the competitiveness. And so early on, I was asked to consult with the folks at Neyland Stadium. So I always enjoyed Neyland Stadium. So I kind of did a history of Neyland Stadium. One of my best friends on this earth was Bobby Campbell. Many of the people that are from Tennessee will remember Bobby. He just had a knack. He could grow grass on a rock. Right? He didn't have a formal turf degree, but I'll swear I learned as much about Bermuda grass from him as he ever did from me, because he would ask questions and I asked him one time, I said, "How in the world do you think like that? How did you see that?" Well, anyway, so I did the history of Neyland Stadium,
Mhm.
and then I did the history of the Turfgrass program, and then I did kind of the history of the evolution of tools that we use as turfgrass professionals in the industry. Things like chelated fertilizers that can protect micronutrients from being tied up in the soils, that make sure that they're still plant available, even if they're, a lot of these are treated as foliar treatments. But once they contact the soil, if the micronutrients in a soluble form, it's often tied up by the soil and becomes inactive. So there's chelated micronutrients in the chelation process that prevents that micronutrient from becoming tied up by the soil, and it becomes plant available, stays plant available. And then things like top dressers and lightweight rollers and our sod production technologies, just magnum rolls. We have the big roll. We actually have sod harvesters that are basically one person sod harvesters. The automation is just unbelievable. So, okay, with that said, I'm going to give you kind of the synopsis of the development of the turf program here. When I first got here, Dr. Lloyd Callahan was doing it all. He was an excellent classroom instructor. He was doing fungicide trials. He had research greens that had been, before I got here in 1985, he lost the greens because UT decided, let's build the vet med school right over there across from Ellington Center. And so some of the best research greens in Knoxville were destroyed.
Right.
But anyway, so Dr. Lloyd Callahan, he was here. He was a graduate of Oklahoma State, but also, if I remember correctly, Rutgers. He came to us from Rutgers, but he had Oklahoma roots. And so then my position was created not by the University of Tennessee actions, but by the actions of the turfgrass industry.
Mhm.
And specifically, Mr. Buck Allison, I met Buck one time. He was the former commissioner of the highway department, I believe. And Mike Allison, his son, was in the sod business in Nashville. And so Mike and I became pretty close. So I think if it wasn't for their political influence and then the influence that the industry had at the Nashville level, my
Mhm.
position probably would have never come to pass. But so I got here in 1985. Then, of all things, and I said this in seminar, the University of Tennessee made one of the finest hires they've ever made in one John Sorokin. Now, John, there are times he talks a bit funny. He drove a winter beater. Do you know what a winter
Yep.
beater is?
No.
If you're from Canada, you might have two vehicles. You have
Okay.
your main like high-end vehicle that you drive when it's nice. But then
Mhm.
over winter, you may be driving a Corvair, you know, or a Volkswagen, something that, if it runs off the road, you're not
No big
out.
deal.
No big deal. Yeah.
No.
No, we don't have to call insurance. Yeah. But anyway, so we hired John. He's gotten all his 3 degrees from Michigan State. But one thing we loved about John, number one, is what you see is what you get. And one thing I particularly liked was sometimes when someone comes into a teaching and research position like he did, the focus is initially on what I'm going to do in the research arena. But
Mhm.
see, what John did, he recognized the value of our geographic location here in
Mhm.
Tennessee. We're in the northern transition zone. He quotes Dr. A.J. Powell, formerly from Kentucky, who was one of my mentors. A.J. would never admit it, but he and Coleman Ward, Coleman was at Auburn, and Coleman and AJ, if it hadn't been for them, they were basically my adopted mentor. They were so gracious, they would not acknowledge that. But AJ says, in the transition zone, we can grow any grass equally poorly. So, but see, John, his goal was to expand the turfgrass curriculum, attract students, and then while he was doing that, to also decide what research really needed to be done
Mhm.
rather than coming in, because John had so much expertise in the sports turf arena. He'd helped with the renovation of the field at Detroit. He'd been internationally involved with soccer installations, and he was just a perfect fit. And so I just never forget one time we have a little place, a lunch place called Mabel's on campus. And John and I were at Mabel's one day, and finally, every once in a while when he's thinking, he'll kind of get this glossy look in his eye. Now he'll disagree, but I can tell when he's really kind of pondering, or my daddy would say he's ciphering, Julie.
Oh,
But
yeah.
yeah, but anyway, so John looked at me and he said, it's going to be fun to see how far we can take this program. Because see, I was the outreach guy. I really wanted to take the research to the industry. And then
Right.
I wanted to take what I saw and learn from the industry professionals what needs to be studied
Mhm.
back to John. So it was a nice arrangement. And then John thinks big picture. I think just within the boundaries of Tennessee.
Mhm.
John thinks globally. I think our personalities complement one another. And then, sure enough, with his interest and he could sell, in another life, he would be an awesome star in sales.
Mm.
But he and I have hammered so often. Every time we saw a dean, we'd explain, hey, the turfgrass program in Tennessee could be this. And one reason is geographic location, transition zone, transition zone, transition zone. And finally, there was a great leader on the ag campus. His name was Dr. Joe DiPietro. And Joe listened to us.
Yeah.
And Joe made sure that Brandon Horvath was hired to do the teaching.
Mhm.
But in between that time, a second greatest hire, well, and Dr. Horvath was the third. Great hires. We've just had the beautiful thing about our program is we've been able to hire and retain who we want to carry our banner. And I don't know how many programs can say that. But anyway, so Jim Brosnan came on board, and it's just like having another brother. So, and see, I had three sisters. That's how come I'm as weird as I am. But really, I consider Dr. Sorokin, Dr. Horvath, and Dr. Brosnan, in addition to being premier researchers and instructors and extension people and communicators, they're like brothers to me. And so that's kind of how this thing evolved. So, and I'll say this for the UT athletics department, Dr. Sorokin let it be known that our consultation as the turf team at UT has saved the department X number of dollars. Okay. And I remember, I can't tell you how much money was saved. Dr. Sorokin had a graduate student I was on the committee, who did a study on paint. Mm-hmm. And how much savings there could be. There's like how in economics, there's a law of diminishing returns. Mm-hmm. And so there's a certain amount of paint that you need to apply on those lines. And any excess might be beneficial when you're on the field, but from the stands, you can't tell the difference. And so I can't tell you how much money that has saved high school budgets, middle school budgets, impactful research. So anyway, so the UT Athletics actually supported Dr. Horvath's hire, I think, for at least 5 years. Yeah, wow. So they were paying for his position. And then it's just interesting that Dr. Horvath was gaining national and international recognition for the concepts and his new technologies that he uses in the classroom to educate. Mm-hmm. There's so many different ways to educate, empower, gaming. I asked him one time, I said, how in the world did you decide? Because he had like a Jeopardy turf game.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. But see, he could relate today's students.
Right.
Yeah. And so in their own rights, they've all gained national and international recognition. Mm. And then I just kept plowing along. But it's been a heck of a good ride, Julie.
Steady alongside it really is a great crew. And
what's funny, and they just kind of shake their heads, and I've told several department heads this. A great friend of mine who just left our university and went to Oklahoma State University as the research director. Many of the listeners may know Dr. Scott Sensman. Mm-hmm. I asked Scott one time, I said, you're from Southern Ohio. You ever bet on the horses? And he goes, what? What brought this on? I said, I'm trying to decide what my role is in this thing called a turf team. Mm-hmm. And my role is to keep the thoroughbreds on the track. I'm like the horse with the big behind that takes the thoroughbred to the gate. Okay. And then the thoroughbred goes into the gate, the bell goes off, the thoroughbred runs like crazy. And then at the end of the race, that horse with the big behind goes up beside the thoroughbred and then takes him back to the stables.
Can I run this analogy by the rest of the turf team, Tom? I want their feedback on this. This is
they would agree. I would hope they would agree. Yeah. Yeah. I try to contribute. I love working with the county agents. I love working with master gardeners. I love working with the industry professionals. But someone could actually stay busy just answering homeowner calls up here on a daily basis, because there's so much interest in home landscapes right now. And there has been. Yeah. And so I do things that I totally enjoy doing, but I'm not sure that they would look as good on a spreadsheet, because I'm not writing grants. I'm not attracting extramural funding. And I don't have an international reputation other than my contacts by way of the World Wide Web.
So I want to talk about that a little bit, because I've been working with you guys in this context for about 4 years. And prior to that, I was.
And you're still with us. This is what amazes me.
I'm still here. You haven't run me off yet, Tom. You're going to have to work a lot harder. So understanding the relationship of researchers and turf teams at universities and extension being kind of the outreach arm of that into the industry, do you feel like I think in Tennessee, probably maybe even most of all of the groups that I work with, I feel like anybody I talk to in Tennessee understands who is Extension and what do they do and how can they help me? And how,
Yeah.
again, can I give back and say, hey, here's something I'm dealing with. And can you take this back? And is this something that's worthy of being looked at more closely? In the industry in Tennessee, the people I have talked to, they do give you a lot of credit for that. And so when you tell me you were shy and you kind of had to work up to how were you talking in front of and to people, like it's so hard for me to align those two. So, I mean, tell me, how did you get comfortable in that role of being out and about and learning to work with professionals across the state and then bridge that gap back to the university?
Well, first of all, let me say I've made up for it. Okay. Like I didn't talk till I was 3.5 years old. I was very prematurely born.
Mhm.
Okay. And my mom and dad, they thought I had a speaking problem because early on I hadn't said much of anything till I was like at the age of 3.5 years of age. My mom told me, they took me to the doctor and they asked if there was should we do speech therapy? And the doctor looked at him after analyzing me by myself. He said, "You've been spoiling this child. He hasn't had to speak."
Were your sisters older?
One older sister, okay, thought she was my mother.
I was
Okay,
going to say, sisters
yeah.
like to speak for little brothers. I have observed this in my house.
But so the reality was, he told her, told my mom and dad, he said, make him stand up for himself. All he does is grunt and point, and he gets everything. But I think what it was because I was premature, and they were really not sure that I would survive.
Mm.
But anyway, so I've definitely made up for the speaking part. I'm just about caught up. Uh, One thing though that I owe the industry so much is they were willing to share with me. Here, I'm from the university. Here comes this guy from the university. And I learned so much, definitely for the first 5 years. Some of my closest friends, I would tell them, I'd say, hey, tell me how this works. Why do you do it this way? Because I had not been out on the golf courses and dealt with traffic, and we'd worked with plots. When you have 50,000 rounds of golf a year on a golf green, it's 5,500 square feet. There are issues that are going to come up. And so it's such a challenge.
Mhm.
Same with the sports turfs. I've worked some with Bermuda grass, not much at all with overseeding. So here we at Tennessee, go out to the football coaches, and you've got a high school that's got a very limited budget, that the soccer coach wants to play on the field in the spring, and the football coach wants to protect the field so that he's got a safe field in the fall. You have to develop, you don't really negotiate, I guess you litigate. You kind of explain one thing, but so basically, I guess it's basically learning. It's learning, and a lot of it was not just learning the ins and outs of the industry, but learning how to listen. Yeah, and so I think that's really helped me over my career.
Yeah. Well, and what I'm hearing from what you just said is really valuing the real world experience and knowledge that turf professionals have, outside of research, and like, this is what I do every day and this is how we've dealt with this. Now, would you write it this way in a book? Maybe not, but
No,
this is the truth on the ground of
yeah,
what people are having to do every day, and that you acknowledge and value that, I think is makes an impact.
yeah, and I think that's so true. And the thing that I always keep in mind, what that individual does on a daily basis dictates whether he's employed or she's employed.
Hmm.
So, and I'm thinking to myself, even though the term turfgrass specialist, I get to do all kinds of things, Julie. I might work one day with a high school football coach. I might work one day with a golf course superintendent. I might work one day with marketing and communications at the University of Tennessee, deciding how to package or brand something. Even though I'm the turfgrass person in
Hmm.
extension, I get a lot of calls. And the neat thing is that the longer you're employed, sometimes people just call me to find out who they're supposed to call.
Yeah.
So I'm almost at times like a dispatcher. But this thing called turf, people ask, how in the world how did you, I've gotten like my closest friends, some of my closest friends on this green earth are turfies. It's
Mhm.
just a quote, turfies.
Yes.
For some reason, I don't know whether we lit the light socket. I don't know whether we didn't get enough sleep one night, but we're enamored with this population of plants called turf grasses,
Mm.
and we try to see what they can do, or how we can influence what they do, and we stress them. Yeah. So I've been very, very fortunate to have been able to work here in an area of the United States that is not easy to manage turf.
You have some interesting stories from your days traveling across the great state of Tennessee. So you have any good stories you would share with us?
Oh yes. Well, first of all, when you're working with county extension professionals and they ask you what you want to eat, I've been accused of knowing where every McDonald's is along the I-40 corridor because I've traveled so much early on. So fast food is not something that I really enjoy when I'm working with the county professionals.
Right.
I've eaten some of the best barbecue,
Mm.
some of the best fried green tomatoes. You're at a country smorgasbord when there are fried green tomatoes on the smorgasbord,
Yes.
right? For lunch. Some of the best catfish. If you want good catfish, Lake County. Man, up the
Spend some
Tennessee
time
River.
around Reelfoot Lake.
Oh yeah, yeah. And I actually learned how that was formed. Did you know the story about that one, Julie?
I went on no fewer than 5 field trips to
Have you seen
Reelfoot
the
Lake
eagles?
as a
You've seen the
child.
eagles?
Yes. We've
Oh
flown
God.
snakes, we've seen the eagle, we've toured around. I mean, all of the above. It's a really cool place.
They actually have a boat, a fishing boat that somebody actually constructed specifically for using on that lake, because that lake is very shallow and there are a
Mhm.
lot of cypress knees.
Right.
And yeah, but the first time I saw it, I thought, man, what on earth is that? I thought Jed Clampett goes to New York City. I had no idea what that was. But so, gosh, I'll say this. Let me frame it by saying I've been to Hohenwald, Limestone. Where else? Oh gosh,
Have you been to
Red Boiling Springs,
have you been to Frog Jump or Bucksnort?
Bucksnort. You don't want to miss Bucksnort.
No, no.
But in terms of stories, oh gosh, really, there's not one of my favorites, but I've got a lot, and it usually involves something that I've done. I've been stuck on sod farms at like 8 o'clock at night. Let's see, I've had to ask for somebody in a tractor to pull my UT car out. I asked him one time, I said, Booker, I love barbecue, but I don't want to eat it. I forget what the big chain barbecue restaurant was in Memphis. Started with a G, maybe. I can't remember. Gridley's or something like that. But I said, if you don't mind, I want to eat barbecue where you eat barbecue.
You go to Mason, Tennessee?
I've been to some places. Anyway, so he took me to a place. We parked outside, and I don't know if you've been in some of these rural Tennessee, Oklahoma, Arkansas areas. Some of the older buildings, they would have tar paper
Mhm.
as kind of an insulator, and then they would have like this sand-based, I guess you would just call it sheeting, that made no boards,
Mhm.
other than the structure, other than the boards that were structurally involved.
Right.
So I looked at the outside of that building. And I thought, Booker, are we really going to eat inside this building? Or do you like, I'll take that to go, ma'am. I had this, it was the best barbecue that I ever eat. Yeah. And a tin roof. It was one of those tin roofs where it was rusted. And chances are, if there was a 3-inch rain, I'll bet you they put some pails out.
Yeah.
But some of the best barbecue that I've ever eaten. Yeah.
Yeah. That's
So
great. Well, and how fun that was to have Booker there at the conference when you had your impromptu speech. He was there. I got to meet him.
oh, he's a mess. Yeah, he and I've served on committees together. You learn a lot about people when you're sitting Here, sometimes at the university, we get things done at the committee level. But Julie, have you ever been sitting in a committee meeting and wondering, why am I here?
I plead the fifth on that, Tom.
Okay, well, I don't. It's like sometimes I'm thinking, man, I should be eating right now.
What is the point? Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So, but we've thoroughly discussed several issues. Yeah, but he's been a great friend.
Let's try your hand at prophecy. Now we've kind of covered your
Oh,
career at a broad angle. Let's talk about you're passing the torch and you're going to enjoy a lovely retirement, as you mentioned, going wherever your wife wants to go, correct?
boy, you've got a memory, girl.
All right, so let's look forward and so what do you see? I think industry wide, there's a lot of big challenges to overcome right now with labor and regulation, and there's a lot. But I feel like you, the Tennessee Turf Team, other researchers in other states are really working to help the industry on those levels. What do you see coming down the pipeline, and what do you hope to see when you do pass the torch and this next generation of leaders comes up?
Well, thank goodness I understand that I may be able to pass the torch with the economics as they are right now. And we feel very fortunate in the plant sciences department to be able to fill a position such as mine. Because sometimes, and whenever anyone leaves, that's an opportunity for the university to make a change in terms of what direction that may need to be taken, because there are opportunities that we can't respond to because we're full up. We don't have lab space. We don't have an opportunity open. And so sometimes a position that is closed as a result of retirement, there's no guarantee that that will be filled.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so happy. I'm aware that that's not going to happen in the case of the turf extension position.
Mm-hmm.
I can guarantee you, it's almost guarantee you that it's going to change in terms of the percentage. And this is what's interesting, Julie. At a university, we think in terms of research, extension, and teaching.
Mm-hmm.
But the turf team, we all kind of share in that. I've guest lectured, and years ago I've taught in the classroom, and I've thoroughly loved it. I haven't done formal research, but I've had some input in terms of what direction some of this has taken, or maybe at least made Dr. Sorokin, Horvath, or Brosnan aware. But we don't necessarily, as a team, have these hard line, oh, wait a minute now, you do the E, I'll do the R, and then Horvath does the T. We don't necessarily work like that. And I think that's our strength.
Mm-hmm.
I also think that our strength is that we're collegial and we like working with others from other universities.
Right.
And in fact, some of the colleagues that we work with are some of our former students that are now at universities.
Right.
Now, sometimes that can become a problem in that it's almost, I was thinking about this the other day. If I was a leader, I would not want to have a group of advisors that thought like I did. I love the diversity. I've met people here at UT from Iraq, India, the Philippines, from all over the world. And that's a lot of fun just to get to know those cultures and be introduced to some of the cultural differences. But I think that's what will continue to make us stronger, is to identify people that we want to work with that have a skill set that will let us advance a new technology or discovery. When you think of a university, I think of discovery. That's the fun part. Something that's brand new, and then, okay, it's brand new, but conceptually, how do we know this technology is working on a small scale. How do we get it to a golf course with 160 acres?
Right.
Who would have thought that it's like the drone, this unmanned aerial vehicle, I'm going to still refer to it as a drone, right?
Yeah.
Who on earth would have thought that we could use that to identify areas on the golf course that we have an irrigation leak, or even satellite aided fertilization? Think about these things that have occurred. Like, I would have never thought that I'm going to be able to, in the year 2022, go online and get a virtual tour of a golf course buy whole,
Yeah.
and never have played it, never been on it. I don't know where the next major advancement's going to be, but hopefully it's going to be as a result of communications from the industry professionals in terms of, okay, what we need,
Mhm.
or somebody saying, hey, you know what? If we could adapt, sometimes the nice thing is we have the opportunity to interact with engineers. We have the opportunity to interact with medical professionals like Dr. Sorokin's work with the Center for Athletic Field Safety and Dr. Dixon's work. They're working with, when you think about it, they're working with physicists and they're working with people that know bones and structure and skeleton and forces and physics. So that's where I think we have an advantage as a university is to reach across the out of the office and maybe even across campuses or across states to identify people that have a common interest and can help advance some level of technology or some aspect of safety or something that's of value to the population across the United States. That's fairly broad. We can narrow it to turf, but I'll be honest with you, I never thought I'd see a better Bermuda grass than the old Tiff Way that was found in a seed lot from Africa. And Dr. Glenn Burton at Tifton, Georgia found it. And it didn't come out of a conventional breeding program. He noticed, hey, chromosomes are different. And so all of a sudden now this variety that's been a fantastic Bermuda grass variety since the 50s, that was because somebody was astute and recognized that, hey, there's something going on here that I need to investigate. So some of our best varieties have actually been mutants. Some have been to direct development out of breeding programs at universities and at other companies. But the reality is we have to remain sharp as industry professionals. I would hope that, and I don't know of an industry professional. Now, burnout, I think, is definitely can be problematic. We get fatigued. You know, our industry professionals, and our county extension agents and professionals, they have so much on their plates. I just remember I've learned over the years, don't visit a county that's during their fair week.
Oh, don't do it. Yeah.
I know, yeah. You know, it's like, yeah, they're walking around like they're in the office, but not really.
Yeah.
Because you know they had like a heifer show last night at the fair.
Well, listen, don't mess with the heifer show.
No.
That's off limits in especially my home county too.
But you know what I really enjoy, and I've learned, inventions in many cases have been invented by people that were extremely tired. Yeah, you know, it's like, hey, wait a minute, we've got to do something a little different.
What is the quote? Necessity is the mother of invention.
Invention, yeah. I think it is. What I really hope is, I hope that the university will continue to be in a position to be able to be responsive to the industries. Not just in my case, I'm prejudicial. I think I work with what I consider the best industry in Tennessee. But the reality is, I think it's all about communications, but then also it's about funding. In order to make something happen, you have to be able to promote it.
Right.
You know, you have to maybe have a prototype, you have to have an idea, you have to have a concept, then you have to have finances such that that can support the advancement of whatever it is you're trying to advance. I would be terrible at fundraising.
Same here.
But now John Sorokin, he's my guy.
He's got the gift.
Yeah. That's what I love so much about my job, is that there's so much there's so many different things I can do. I do have the ability to pretty much do what I want to do now, at least for the next few months. And what I've learned, Julie, the older you get, the more you can get away with.
I'm writing that down right now.
You know, you've heard my dad told me that a long time ago. And I thought, man, what he must have been like when he was younger. Because he's like crossed the line several times in my view as his son. Yeah.
We'll shift out of work mode And after a long and successful and distinguished career, Tom, tell me what your first day of retirement looks like.
I have no earthly idea. Here's what's strange. I thought you were going to ask me what I'm proudest of. And it's so corny, but the reality is the best thing that ever happened to me was my wife and my kids. Yeah. And I rarely speak about my family. That's really what I'm proudest of. And there were times when I'm like, and I'm not sad about it because it was part of the job, but there were times when I was writing publications at 3 a.m. on a Saturday, Saturday morning, because I wanted to spend quality time with the kids, but the reality is I had to produce in order to be able to stay employed. It's just kind of it's this thing called tenure and tenure track and advancing and actually representing the university. So it sounds kind of corny, but that's what I'm most proud of is my family. So in terms of what day one looks like after retirement, I'll have to keep you posted. I'm believe it or not, are you a planner? Like if you take a trip, like, do you know when you're going to stop to eat lunch at 11:47 on Tuesday?
Well, I don't know if I'm that degree of planner. Probably not.
Okay. Well, I'm not either.
Okay, now, so it's just and after a career of having to have a lot of structure, maybe that's a really fantastic way to go into retirement is I have no plans and I'm going to do whatever I want at any moment.
Well, now I've got so many things I want to do in terms of people say, oh, there's the honeydew list. No, it's my list as well. There's so many. I got to paint some rooms. I want to do enclose a garage. I've got so many things I want to do that I'm going to have to learn. Kind of like what you said, okay, now all of a sudden I'm this mega editor and all around marketing person. And I don't know anything about turf. I don't know anything about, one thing I do know is I don't want to hang drywall with my wife. Yeah, that's probably not on the.
That's the one do not do.
Yeah, or wallpaper. Yeah.
Oh, don't do that. Yeah, no, nobody needs that.
Yeah, but
wallpaper is.
But there are some things I want to do. Then, of course, also landscaping. But I've got several hobbies. I kid everybody. My first week, I'm going to do some serious fishing.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah, probably from the bank. But you know what else I want to do? I want to go to Huntsville and I want to do some strange things. Because I remember taking the kids to the aerospace, the Air Museum in Huntsville. Yeah. Don't they have still a weightless room? I think if you take the summer camp, I want to be weightless. I want to do that. I believe it or not, I want to jump out of a plane with a parachute buddy. I'm not much on hit and roll. That's because I used to rock and I used to roll. Now I'm like a bad rotisserie. I'm like a broken cam in a motor. I can go 90 degrees and then 90 degrees back. I'm not much of a roller anymore.
You don't have the full 360.
No, 360.
That's not, okay.
No. And then I've got a great friend that actually he flies air balloons. He's got an air balloon.
Wow.
And so I'm going up with him.
Going up. Okay.
So I'm going to do some crazy stuff. I've had a great life. If I have an accident, so be it. I don't recover as well as I used to or as quickly, but I want to do some crazy stuff. I don't want to bungee jump.
No.
Julie, I'll share this with you and then we can probably wrap this up. But a good friend of mine years ago, his name was Andy Brennan. You didn't know him. Mm-hmm. You know Shalea Finney. Mm-hmm. Okay, Shalea, I think she's coming back to Tennessee. I think she may already be back. But anyway, she used to work for Andy. She started out, I met her first at what was Opryland Golf Course. Then it became Gaylord Springs, and now it's something else. But anyway, Andy, he decided he was going to go bungee jump. Yeah, I don't know if he was in Australia, but he went to where it was one of those scientific deals. He said they measure your height, they weigh you, and then they ask you, do you want to go head first or feet first? Ugh. And then he said, but the big question is, do you want just your fingers to touch the water? Do you want to go into the wrist or go into the elbow? And so he did it. And
none of the above is
no. And he said it was fantastic, except he didn't read the fine print. He said, the first time it's awesome. particularly if you survive. And he said, you scream because you're so happy, and then you get saliva all over your face. Then you realize, hey, you're going back up, then you're coming back down, then you're going back up, then you're coming back down, then you're going back up, then you're coming back down. Then he pick you up in a boat. Because you don't think about it. You don't think about like the post major events. When you bungee jump, you don't think about it's like being on a yo-yo. Being a yo-yo. You're
There's
not
a
just
life analogy here somewhere, Tom. I don't know. I'm going to have to ponder it for a bit, but it sounds terrible.
Oh no! It was he was so. Oh, and to hear him tell it, I laughed till I cried. Yeah, and he's a very Andy was very calculating, and he would have. I think he was a historian actually too. Mm-hmm. So, but I want to get out there and do some strange things now. Where my dean, I want to do some things that my dean might not appreciate me doing.
Oh,
yeah. Tom, you're not representing the University of Tennessee. Yeah. No, Dean, I'm not. I'm jumping out of this airplane, and it's a perfectly good airplane. It's still going to fly. I want to fly in a glider. Is what I really want to do.
Goodness, you've walked the line, and now you're ready.
Oh yeah, no, I'm free.
You're out.
Yeah.
Well, Tom, I'm going to hold you to your. I don't know if it was a promise or a passing comment that you would still be sending me all kinds of fabulous articles. And when you do, I'm going to expect to hear all of the wild and crazy things you're doing.
Well, and believe me, Jacobowski and I've got some plans.
I'm going to maybe need to be your documentarian when you and Brad get out like that.
He's kind of like a brother I never had, only I'm the older brother. Yeah. Hey, thank you so much. I totally enjoy this. One last thing. One of the weirdest things, like on day one, and I don't know if you've ever talked to anybody about this, but like, okay, you're a graduate student, you're a lowly graduate student, you've been writing on a dissertation, they've been editing, they tell you can't write, you go through a thesis defense or a dissertation defense, and they make you feel like you don't know anything because it's part of the process. Okay, so day one, I'm at the University of Tennessee, don't have an assigned office yet. I'm in behind a common area where I have a phone, and I've got one of these old Radio Shack SR80 printers. And every time it starts to print, it sounds like a jet warming up.
Oh, it's the one that has the little things on the side.
They're huge. Oh yeah, it was huge. Mm-hmm. Okay, so get my first call. Dr. Samples, you have a call. The first time I was called Dr. Samples, it's like, wait a minute, I think they mean me. That's how naive I was. Yeah. So it's been one fun ride, though, I'll tell you. I've had a ball.
Don't miss an episode of Tennessee Turfgrass. Subscribe at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also visit us at theturfzone.com.
You've been listening to The Turf Zone. Thank you to our sponsors, including Buy Sod, world-class service on demand. Visit us online at www.buysod.com. For more episodes of The Turf Zone, visit theturfzone.com and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast app.